Brazil holds a presidential election, polls close in the evening, and by dinner, the country knows who won. Not a projection, not a call by a television network. The official count, essentially complete, within a few hours. Meanwhile, other wealthy democracies with a fraction of the population spend days counting, and sometimes weeks. So how does the fourth largest democracy on Earth, over 150 million voters, spread across a country bigger than the continental United States, including river communities you can only reach by boat, finish before everyone's gone to bed? The answer is that Brazil made a decision in the 1990s that almost nobody else made, and then committed to it completely. Start with the problem it was solving, because that's the part that explains the design. Brazilian elections before the 1990s were slow, and slowness was the least of it. Paper ballots in a country with then significant illiteracy created enormous room for spoiled votes and for the practice of filling them in helpfully on a voter's behalf. Counting took days, and every one of those days was an opportunity. The move to electronic voting wasn't about convenience. It was an anti-fraud project. The machine they built is the opposite of what electronic voting usually conjures. It isn't a computer in the general sense. It's a sealed, single-purpose device with a small screen and a numeric keypad, and it does one job. There's no operating system you'd recognize, no browser, no general-purpose software. Critically, it is not connected to the internet, not during voting, not at any point in the process. Voting on it is deliberately simple. Candidates have numbers, you key in the number. A photograph of that candidate appears on screen so you can confirm you got the right one, and you press a green button labeled Confirm. The photograph is a genuinely elegant solution to illiteracy. You don't have to read a name to know who you've selected. The whole interaction takes under a minute, which matters when you're moving 150 million people through polling stations in one day. Then the logistics, which are the most impressive part and get the least attention. Around 500,000 machines have to physically reach every corner of the country. That means aircraft to remote airstrips, boats up Amazon tributaries for days, and in some places, mules and long walks with a machine and a battery. They go to indigenous villages, to riverside settlements of a few dozen people, to army posts on the frontier. The electoral authority treats reaching the last 100 voters as a non-negotiable obligation rather than a rounding error, and it does this for every election. Voting is also compulsory for most adults, which changes everything about how the system is designed. When turnout is a legal duty rather than a matter of enthusiasm, you're not planning for the 60% who might show up, you're planning for nearly everyone. That forces the whole apparatus to be built for maximum throughput, and it removes the arguments about access and queue length that consume so much political energy elsewhere. So how do the results move so fast? When polling closes, each machine tallies its own votes internally and prints a summary. That summary is digitally signed and transmitted over a dedicated, closed network, not the public internet, to the regional and then national tabulation centers. Because the counting happened inside each machine as votes were cast, there is no counting left to do at the end. There's only addition. The reason Brazil is fast isn't that its computers are quick, it's that the count finished at the same moment the voting did. There's an institutional detail behind all of this that most countries would find startling. Brazil's elections are run by an electoral court, a branch of the judiciary that administers the vote, registers the parties, regulates campaigning, adjudicates disputes, and certifies the result. It writes the rules, runs the process, and judges the complaints. In most democracies, those functions are deliberately kept apart, on the principle that nobody should referee their own match. Brazil concentrated them on purpose, and the reasoning came out of the same history that produced the machines. A fragmented, politicized administration was exactly how elections had been manipulated before. Consolidating everything in an independent judicial body was intended to make interference harder. The trade-off is that an enormous amount now rests on that single institution remaining trusted. And when it becomes the target of a political campaign, there is no second authority to appeal to. The ballot itself is also doing more work than it looks. Brazilians frequently vote in several contests on the same day: president, state governor, senators, federal and state deputies. And the machine walks the voter through them in sequence, one screen at a time, confirming each. In a paper system, that's a long and error-prone ballot paper. Here, it's a series of short questions, which is a substantial part of why the process moves as quickly as it does at the polling station as well as at the count. Now the criticism, because it is serious and deserves stating properly rather than dismissed. For most of its life, the Brazilian machine has produced no voter-verified paper record. You press confirm and your vote exists as an electronic record you cannot personally inspect. The security argument against this is not about whether the current system has been compromised. No proven case of fraud through the machines has been established across nearly 3 decades. It's about what a recount would even mean. If the electronic record is the only record, then verifying an election requires trusting the system that produced the number, rather than checking it against something physical. Brazil's answer has been transparency of process rather than paper. Ahead of elections, the Electoral Authority runs public tests where invited specialists, universities and security researchers attempt to break the machines under controlled conditions, with findings published. The source code is made available for inspection by political parties and other authorized bodies. On election day, sample machines are pulled and voted on publicly, with the results compared against the official tally. It's an unusually open regime by international standards, and it is still, fundamentally, an argument that the process can be trusted, rather than that the outcome can be independently reconstructed. Which is exactly why this became a political battleground rather than a technical one. In recent Brazilian elections, the machines themselves became a campaign issue, with claims of fraud circulating widely and no paper trail available to settle the argument in a way that satisfied people who had already decided. That's the real cost of the design. A system with no physical record isn't just harder to audit, it's harder to defend in public, because the experts verified it is a weaker answer than, here are the ballots, count them again. Brazil has, to be fair, moved on this. Legislation was passed requiring a printed voter-verified record, and it was piloted in a subset of machines before being struck down by the Supreme Court on the grounds that printing a record linkable to a voter threatened ballot secrecy. A genuine tension rather than an excuse, since the same paper that lets you audit a vote can, handled carelessly, let someone prove how they voted and therefore be paid or coerced for it. The argument has never really been settled, and it resurfaces before every election, and it explains why other countries haven't copied a system that is demonstrably faster, cheaper per vote, and more accessible. Electronic voting of this kind requires a population to place a very high degree of trust in one central institution, the Electoral Authority that builds, tests, distributes, and counts. Brazil built that institution deliberately and gave it real independence. Plenty of countries don't have an equivalent or have one that half the population doesn't believe. Where that trust is absent, slow paper counting isn't inefficiency. It's the point, because anyone can watch it happen, which is the genuine trade-off underneath all of this. Brazil optimized for speed, accessibility, and resistance to the specific frauds that plagued its paper era, and accepted a system most citizens cannot personally verify. Others optimized for verifiability and accepted delay, expense, and a great many spoiled ballots. Neither is obviously right. They're answers to different questions about what an election is actually for, which leaves a question worth carrying into any election, anywhere. Do you trust a result because you can check it, or because you trust whoever counted?